we're live than we actually are. Amazing. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here with Antisha and I. We are so excited to be talking about living grace fully, unlocking the power of giving yourself grace and others as well, so we can have a healthier environment at work and wherever else you might be. So, for those of you who are here today, feel free to comment, and we like to highlight anyone who has questions or any thoughts. So, if you do, feel free to put anything in the comments. And Tisha, thank you so much for being here with me today. And Tisha, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first, thank you so much, Lori, for having me. I go by Tisha. My name is Antisha, and I recently turned 40-year-old. I just had a birthday in May, and it was very exciting because my daughter also had a birthday in May as well, and she turned 18. So two big monumental, kind of birthdays. So we've been celebrating. We just came back from Europe on yesterday, so that was a nice trip. But yeah, I have been an HR professional for a little over 12 years now. I started, believe it or not, in the U.S. Air Force, where I was a meteorologist. But because I had been assigned some additional duties, I realized that what I really liked was HR related work. So people development and, support type work. And so I decided to pursue a degree in that and started working in the government, doing HR work. And eventually 3 years ago, started my own business, make the change, doing HR, providing HR services for people. So
I
that's a
love
little
it.
bit about me.
And you're really focused on the employee aspect of HR, along with like the the typical HR things like policy manuals and things like that.
Absolutely.
Uh,
I'm definitely an employee advocate.
okay. Shatterin, it seems like because you mentioned it's frozen for you. It looks like it's still going through. Try refreshing the page, maybe. Sorry about that happening. So thank you, Antisha, for that introduction. Yeah, what you do for clients is so valuable and so needed. The stereotypical HR is just out and it doesn't work anymore, right? We
True.
need more modern approaches given the drastic changes, especially over the past few years that have happened. People are no longer tolerating bad workplaces. So, your ability to help organizations and leaders transform to a healthier workplace is so needed. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Um, let's talk a little bit about how we can give grace to ourselves and others. Um, I talk a lot with my clients about the need for not being so perfectionistic. Um, and I know you talk a lot about helping leaders be more empathetic for their employees. So let's start out with kind of your side of helping the leaders or even just coworkers be more empathetic to those people on their team.
Well, first things first, we have to all remember, and we hear this all the time, but we don't tend to apply it, most of us. So everybody's going through something. We're all struggling with things that other people don't know about. And so, just like you would like and appreciate grace, whether you feel that you receive it or not, you should always attempt to give that to other people. So, when I am in my training sessions and I'm facilitating, one of the things that I always tell leaders is, approach every situation with your employees from that perspective. You don't know what it is that they're going through. You may feel like a change in appearance means one thing when it's totally something different. And
Right.
so it's very easy if we think about some of the things in our own personal lives that we've gone through and how maybe we manage those situations. Although people manage things very differently, we all handle stress, have different stressors and handle stress differently. But it's important to recognize that if a person, for example, is coming to you and saying, I need some time off, it's really not your business to ask them why they need that time off.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that is very controversial that I tell managers and tell leaders is, you often want to make the determination of whether or not a person's request for leave is justifiable or not. Well, can I afford to let you off for this reason? If you can afford to let them off for any reason, then they should be let off. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter what it is. And
Just
so we
trust
have
your
to.
employees.
Yes, support them.
judgment on what they need in their life.
Right. Change your mindset. And so it's a struggle. It's a struggle for a lot of people because I hear this all the time. I'm a business owner, so I get it. I have people who work, with me and for me. So I totally get it. But a lot of the times what we try to do is we say, well, for example, a death in a family, I can let you off for that. But if you lost your dog, that's not as important. Well, to you it may not be, but to them it is. And some people, deal with the loss of a pet through the same way they deal with the loss of a human. And so it's not up for you as a manager or a leader, to determine or decide what's an important enough reason to let someone, take that time off.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
give people grace.
absolutely. Um, yeah, it's a great example because some people, have fur babies and some people have human babies, and the attachment that we have can be completely different from another person. Um, my husband is much more maternal than I am, and so and like he's also really good with animals. So like if anything were to like our daughter getting hurt at school or a pet passing, like he would be much more affected about any of that than I am. Like of course I love my daughter, and um, once we have cats and dogs, I'm sure he's going to be more affected by that. We only have a fish right now. But it's just you have to remember that everyone has different life experiences, and you know one person's world paradigm is completely different than another. Um, so it's just important to keep that perspective in mind. What
And since
affects you doesn't necessarily affect you others.
Right. And since you brought this up, you talked about, your husband being more maternal than you are. Another thing that we also have to let go of is a lot of these stereotypes that we've
Mm,
had about how different people are supposed to behave, particularly, men versus women and boys versus girls, or, and it's just, if you think about it, we have been taught or we have heard and read things that kind of tell us how we should behave. And it takes us away from being who we are. You hear more people talking about wanting to be their authentic selves. Well, how can they do that if you have a manager saying to you, hey, you're a guy, you shouldn't be crying about this particular issue, right?
right.
That should never be a conversation. It should never be based on a person's gender or gender identity or any of that, their status or any of that. So again, just being empathetic, be very empathetic and allow people to be themselves, allow people to express themselves respectfully, of course,
Mhm.
professionally, right? In those settings, so that they can be comfortable and they can be more productive and be more positive in your workplaces. But yes, prime example, sometimes men are more maternal, and they feel a little bit deeper than women do. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I know that sometimes when we think we're being judged, people aren't analyzing us nearly as much as we might think. Um, and that's called the spotlight effect, which is something that I teach clients as well, which is essentially our belief that people are judging us way more than they actually are. Like, think about how much you're thinking about yourself in your own life. That's how other people are too. They're thinking about themselves and their own life. So, yes, like we make assessments about those around us in order to make decisions about who we want to spend time with and how to approach problem solving. We're supposed to do that. But there's a level of criticism, perfectionism that we're actually really internalizing that probably isn't usually happening in other people's minds, like how they're judging us. So much of how we think people are judging us is based on our conditioning from childhood and society and people's expectations of how we should be. And then our brain repeatedly tells us, oh, I'm in a similar situation to what I experienced a long time ago over and over again. So this is likely what will happen. So we assume that people are judging us in that way. And it's usually not the case. Most of the time, people, for example, if we're doing a LinkedIn Live, most of the time people are going to be like, oh, that was such great advice. Thanks so much. And move on with their day. They're probably not hyper analyzing how we're presenting ourselves necessarily. And once I learned that, because I grew up with a perfectionistic father and I surrounded myself with people who were not hypercritical like him,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to relax so much more. So, like, give yourself grace, be okay with making mistakes because everyone else is probably okay with you making mistakes. And keep in mind, I saw this meme the other day that was like, before you make a mistake and it was the earth, right? After you make a mistake and it's the same
Mm-hmm.
image of the earth, right? Like everything's okay. Think like you're not like you probably don't have access to like nuclear weapons. You're not destroying the entire planet. Like everything's going to be okay. And so frequently we just internalize our mistakes and are much more critical of ourselves than other people are of us when it comes to making mistakes so often.
Or imperfections. And this is a great way for me to share this example that I share in a lot of my courses. So just think about it. Sometimes, and I'll use an example for, people who go and get, their nails or their feet, done, pedicured or painted, right? Often, if you make a habit of doing something, it can even be your hair, it could be the way you dress. But often, let's just say you have an off day. Most of us have said to someone before, hey, listen, I didn't have a chance to get my nails done, so don't look at my nails, right? Well, the
Right.
person
No
wasn't
one's
even looking at your
noticing.
nails. They weren't paying attention to your nails. Like now, though, because you've acknowledged that, what are they going to do? They're going to look at your nails or your feet or your hair or whatever it is, right? And
100%.
so, yes, so to your point, Lori, oftentimes, those either insecurities that we have or those experiences that we have where we were judged in the past, that makes us behave in a certain way in the current and in the present. And so, just again, just think about that. Think about how many times you've said to someone, oh, overlook this. It can be in your home. Someone comes to your home and you may have not tied it up the way you want to. And you're saying, hey, just overlook this. You have no idea what their home may have looked like or some of the homes they may have seen. So, just think about it. Give yourself a little bit more grace to know that it's okay, especially in those times when you're not feeling like yourself. You're not, and that you're ill or you're stressing or you're dealing with something or you
Yeah.
haven't just had the time, it's okay to be imperfect because we all are.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. And when we are okay being vulnerable and imperfect, it gives other people permission to do the same, which
Absolutely.
really creates an environment that's a lower stress level because we know there's not an expectation at work to perform perfectly all the time or to never have a bad day. Um, Karin, I love your explanation, like your expression of organizational leaders not always getting the empathy that they need. I know, the bad boss story is so prevalent on LinkedIn and among employees. And yes, bosses do greatly affect the entire emotional state frequently of employees. Bosses have bad days too. They're just as human as individual contributors. And giving them the grace to make mistakes as well. Just like a boss would have a conversation with a subordinate about, hey, I noticed it seems like you're having a rough day. You can do the same thing with your boss and just recognize that, like, hey, it seems like you might be having a hard time. You're kind of off today. You want to talk. Like, totally okay to do that as an individual contributor with your boss.
And
Completely
Karen,
fine.
it's so interesting that you bring that point up. Thank you so much, Karen. I love that because one of the things that I was always told and I was taught, and I often used to tell people this before, not so much now because my perspective has changed, but it's very similar to that. You may have heard managers say, well, as a manager, you can't vent down, you have to vent up, right? So we vent up. So to only to other managers and senior leaders. But then when it comes to being empathetic, we don't do the same thing, right? So we put all this pressure when we have all these expectations for those managers and those leaders, but then we don't share that same level of respect when it comes to having empathy for them. So that's a very great point.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, oh, she commented again.
Mm.
It's really prevalent on LinkedIn. I think applying empathy up can completely change your own experience and treat them how you want to be treated. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you want your boss to show that empathy and and let go of extreme expectations, like you have to do the same.
Mm.
And like tell them like, yeah, I get it, like I know you're a boss and we want you to serve us, but we're also here for you, right? We all have hard days no matter what level we are at in an organization. It's so important to remember that.
And it's not always something that we're born with. It's often something that we have to learn and train ourselves to do. Because I could tell you, if you talk to people, 10 years ago or maybe 5 years ago about me as a manager or a supervisor or a leader, and the ones from 3 years ago to today, they'll tell you, I'm a different person. They may have seen something different. I think I've always been empathetic, and I've always tried to be an employee advocate, but there are just certain things that I've had to learn and realize to be able to be more supportive and more empathetic on a holistic level. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, Accepting that we're going to have a hard time and that others are too just decreases the level of expectation sometimes. And I don't mean we shouldn't strive for excellence, but the level of stress that all of us feel on a regular basis to perform really, really high so we don't get judged is just creates unnecessary stress. So if
That
we're
pressure,
creating an
the pressure.
environment,
I like to
yeah,
call
so
it
much
pressure.
pressure. That's
Yeah,
a good way to
yeah.
put it. Um, and if we're to, if we let go of some of that expectation and we're like, oh yeah, people are going to make mistakes, then it's it's becomes more a matter of fact when it happens. And then we're just able, and because we know people will make mistakes, we kind of recognize what we're looking for in the first place. So then we're able to know that like, oh yeah, that happened. Let's see how we can solve the problem instead of just judging, right? So, and sometimes solving the problem is simply listening to what's going on in another person's life. Um, I know you put in the notes, or I did, surrounding ourselves with people who can pour into us can
Mhm.
really help us learn to give ourselves grace, because it teaches our brain synapses that, like, oh, I don't have to be perfect because this person or people over and over and over again have told us that it's okay to be imperfect. Like, or for example, when I did my first LinkedIn Live with my friend Shelly, she's also a career coach. Because I grew up with a very perfectionistic father, at the end of the live, I said, so how did that go? And she's like, great. I'm like, really? Oh, that's so good. Like, that's so nice. Right? Because my brain automatically went to this expectation of change, immediately identify what it was that you did incorrect, so then you can immediately adjust it, know what you're likely to be criticized for, so then you can immediately correct it or at least anticipate the criticism, so my flight or fight response didn't like turn on right away. um and the more that I've done these lives, the more, I've had a support system of other women and people who accept me as I am, the more relaxed I've become, the less judgmental I've become of myself, because my brain has learned now my father is the exception. All of these other people are think you're awesome. Like, you're a badass. You're great at what you do. And I knew that underneath all of the insecurity, but because of how I was raised, like, I am a recovering insecure woman. Even
Mhm.
though I was born very confident, but all of that trauma over time really decreased my ability to present as confident. So surrounding yourself with other people who see you as highly competent, as capable, as confident, as amazing as how you want to feel, the more you will end up feeling that way.
And
So who your tribe is makes a difference.
yeah, and when you say that, it makes me think about imposter syndrome, which may be a new term to some people, but it's not a new feeling or a new thought for a lot of people, right? And so yeah, I think most people have probably experienced imposter syndrome at some way, in some form. And so yes, putting people around you or having people around you who can tell you, hey, you are great at this. And I don't mean people that are who are just telling you things that you want to hear, but are telling you the truth, right? Because you tend
Right.
to believe it. If you have someone in your system that's just saying whatever, you get to realize, you start to realize that, yeah, you're going to tell me anything that you feel like I want to hear. But those people who are going to give you the good, the bad, and the indifferent, those are the people that you need, because you can trust that when they are sharing some information with you about how your first LinkedIn live was, or how your hair looks, or whatever the case is, they're giving you the genuine truth, and it helps you to be more confident. Then I have seen something, I think it was a meme or something somewhere, where it said, try not to value things from people that you don't necessarily know, when that value is something negative, right? And so it's
Right.
basically saying, don't put negative criticism for people that don't even know you and you don't even know, right? Because you're giving them much more power over you than you should. And so once I
Mm,
started to do that, it made it a lot easier for me to be more confident, and then to try to focus and work on those things that allow me to give myself more grace.
right. Yeah. The people who know you well are the most likely to be able to give you the most relevant feedback, right? We can really internalize trolls online, right? When
Mhm.
we're posting and, if like, yeah, that people might disagree and fine, like we can disagree and like talk about solutions that, may or may not work on either side of the opinion. But then there are those people who are just arguing just to argue, and or just like bashing just because that's like they're just trolling and it's not productive. And when you find those people, you just have to identify, like recognize, like this person's opinion doesn't matter. Like they have no context for my life or whatever it is that you're sharing. So if you're able to separate that like you described, it can really decrease the level of stress that you and pressure that you feel to be a certain type of person or
Mhm.
expectation. Like we will never get 100% likability from the world. There will always
Mhm.
be people who disagree or who don't see everything that we're doing in the way, or in the way that we do. So letting go of always needing everyone's validation
Mhm.
can help us to give ourselves grace too, like separating yourself from the energy that isn't productive or helping.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, Lori, and some of the people watching, but I have a really bad habit. I've gotten better at it, honestly, but I have a bad habit of taking things with me for too long. Someone I don't even know can say something to me, and I find myself 2 weeks, 3 weeks later trying to figure out what I could have done differently, or why I felt the way that I did after the conversation or the interaction. And I'm
Yeah.
doing a whole lot better at dealing with those things by doing exactly what I said before, like trying to understand, why does their opinion of me matter so much when I don't even know them? I don't know them. They don't know what I'm going through, what I've been through, what I'm trying to do, my ambitions. They don't know my achievements, but still that one thing that they said, or maybe two things that they said, have stuck with me this long. I'm giving it too much time and too much energy. I got to let that go. So if
Right.
if you're that person or like that, I'm like that too, but it is something that we do have to work on, so that we can focus on the more positive things and the things that we need to get done, instead of the things that take up too much space in our mind.
Yeah, I can definitely get into those mental spirals as well. um, and what works for one person may not for another. But I realized that part of my obsessive thoughts came from the example of venting that I got um, in my environment as a child. And venting about negative experiences actually reinforces the experience. So if you go into those mental spirals of like people's opinions of you and like you're still thinking about them over and over and over again, like you described, which I used to experience a lot, um, ask yourself if you're like venting in your head or if you've been venting about it over and over to other people. And sometimes we can still go into those mental spirals without it, but we're literally like giving it more power if we're venting about it. For me, just distracting myself with something else has disabled their power from invading my life. So, and then, having other things that bring me joy and other people's opinions that contradict those negative opinions too. So there's that balance that's really helped me. Um, Sonia, you too. Yeah, it can be so hard to let go of other people's opinions. And usually the ones that hurt us the most are those that like really are those insecurities that we think about ourselves and internalize regularly on our own. So yeah, you're definitely not alone there in feeling like we have these mental spirals, and that the criticism that others place upon us, it's really hard to let go of it. And it's those things that are really hard for us that we already are criticizing ourselves for. So yeah, it's really hard to let go sometimes. But like we said, those tips of surrounding yourself with a tribe, giving yourself the grace to make mistakes and doing that over and over and over again enables your brain synapses to start firing differently. So then when you do make mistakes later on, you're less critical of yourself.
And set a time limit on it. This is something that I learned when I was working. I had a really, really good manager. And he told me one time, he said, give yourself a time limit. If you make a mistake, give yourself a certain amount of time to dwell on that mistake and then move on forward, whether it be a day or month or week or whatever. But once you reset that time limit, be done with it. And it takes practice. But after a while, you'll start to realize that it's so helpful and so beneficial because you're slowly telling your mind that this doesn't matter as much as what I think it does. And then when you get to that deadline, say it's a week, you get to that week point and you're like, on to the next thing. Even when you have that thought, that thought about it, or it comes up again, you're like, nope, I said I wasn't going to think about it anymore. The distraction that you talked about, Lori, find a distraction, move on to the next thing. And eventually you won't even think about it anymore. And so, yeah, that was some really good advice that I received from a previous manager that I had when I worked for a CSCD. And he was awesome. Love him to death still. But that's one of the things that he said to me. Just give yourself some time to deal with it and then be done.
Yeah. Yeah. When I say distract yourself, it's definitely not just ignore the feelings.
Right.
Like distracting yourself is like the second or third step. Like, first of all, recognize and accept that like it's okay for you to be feeling whatever it is that you are, and then identify how you can separate yourself from that emotion. And any type of emotion or experience, any type of experience that we fear, what we're really scared of is a feeling. It's just a feeling more than anything else. Like most of the time we're not really in danger. And so it's like separating ourselves in that way, compartmentalizing it like that. If something is scary, like, being in front of a crowd, we're afraid of being judged, then just recognizing and separating that principle in your mind can transform how you show up so frequently. We are about out of time. Thank you so much for joining me, Antisha. Your perspective is so valuable. Thank you for everything that you do for organizations. How can people reach out to you for your services?
So I am, of course, here on LinkedIn, but also Tisha D at makethechange.io is my email address. You can also go to my website, www.makethechange.io, spelled just like the background you see. Feel free to reach out. I love to provide professional development training and human resources support services to my clients.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me. And if
Thank you,
anyone
Lori.
is in need of confidence coaching, helping you build your confidence on stage and in the boardroom, or corporate training, teaching interpersonal public speaking skills, or you want to overcome imposter syndrome that you're feeling on a regular basis, I would love to have a conversation with any of you. I am currently offering free strategy calls. And if you mention this LinkedIn Live, I will give you 10% off any of my services. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Sharon, so glad that it was helpful for you. Thank you again, Antisha, and we will see you all again in a couple weeks. Have a fabulous week.
Thanks. Bye.